Organizing research activities. This is fundamentally part of what GIS can help do. Data collection, collaborating amongst different agencies across disciplines, the economists, the civil engineers, the biologists, the geographers, etc., the data scientists. Analysis, visualization. GIS is highly visual, looking at things with maps, 2D and 3D maps, infographics, dashboards, story maps, instant apps, web mapping applications of all kinds. That is key to GIS. People sometimes ask me, Joseph, what's the big deal about mapping? Maps are very powerful. They're very powerful representations of reality, as I talk about in other videos and other essays. They are not reality. They're representations of reality, very useful representations, to be sure, but they're representations. So be critical of them, but maps have long been, for centuries, used to understand, to explore, to communicate. And for other reasons, too, maps have been used. Some of them not so laudable, right? And some of them not so noble in intention to subjugate people, etc. But maps have always been used as a powerful means of communication. Data access. How do we help people access the data once we publish that data? That's an ongoing discussion in the scientific community. Now, ArcGIS from Esri supports this social science research through the things that you see here. Data access through these tools like Business Analyst, which used to be called Community Analyst. There were two products. Now it's really just called Business Analyst. ArcGIS Earth 3D, kind of like Google Earth meets GIS. Living Atlas of the World, a library of authoritative, metadata-rich layers from state, national, international agencies, nonprofit, private industry, academia. ArcGIS Online, a web-based GIS platform. Collaboration with online enterprise, also ArcGIS Hub to set up data libraries and also to get citizens or community members to communicate with their local governments and with other people. Data collection and creation, there's a whole suite of ways to communicate, as I say in the middle, but then collecting and creating data. You can collect it via drones. You can go out in the field and collect data and put it in a spreadsheet and then map it in ArcGIS Online. There's quick capture, there's field maps, there's Survey 123. There's a lot of ways to get data into a GIS, and there's other videos that I and others have created about this very topic. Now, ArcGIS supports social science research also on the analysis and visualization side, and these tools that you see here. And it's increasingly, this last bullet there, the Adobe Creative Cloud, it shows how GIS is reaching into other tools that people use day to day on the job. And that's just one example. Microsoft Office is another. ArcGIS for Office, for example, is another aspect of that. Communicating, dashboard, story map. Everybody has seen the JHU COVID dashboard on the planet. Everybody with a device. Sometime since 2020, someone has seen that. You've probably seen that. It was very useful for many years, for good reason. That is the most popular dashboard ever created. It has billions of views. But there are other dashboards. There are tens of thousands of dashboards on traffic, on invasive species, on water quality, on trees, etc. Real-time data as well, wildfire perimeters, storms, crime, etc. Dashboards are very useful to disseminate information and communicate that information. Now, what I'm saying here today, folks, this actually goes back a ways. I had the honor of meeting John Pickles last year when I was at UNC Chapel Hill in North Carolina. And I said, Dr. Pickles, I'm a big fan. I read that book, Ground Truth, in grad school. It was required reading, but I actually highly enjoyed it. It's the first book I ever remember that was about the social implications of geographic information systems. And the concern then goes back at least till the 1990s, back to the 1990s. So people have been looking at GIS, not as much as today, but John Pickles was one of the pioneers in saying, this is not a completely objective methodology and set of tools. GIS, just like mapping, is laden with ethical and social meaning. So take a look at that Ground Truth book. It's still relevant today. Two social science examples that I want to highlight here so you really get a sense for what I'm saying here. Attitudes and experiences with electric vehicles and Voices of the Grand Canyon. Voices of the Grand Canyon. It's not just the erosional forces acting on the Grand Canyon. What about these voices? What about the people, the native indigenous people that have been there for hundreds or thousands of years? And so here you've got Jimé Note and his narrative on the word Pueblo. Fascinating. So narrative, petroglyphs, context, video, voices of the Grand Canyon. I just love this. Why is the Grand Canyon a sacred and a special place to many people? Why does it need to be protected? What are the forces acting on the Grand Canyon? Human and natural. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Voices of the Grand Canyon. A qualitative, but mixed with some quantitative as well, but very compellingly told in this story map. Another social science example, attitudes and experiences with electric vehicles. I talked about attitudes and behaviors. Okay, what about a survey? Here's some results, some infographics, some maps about attitudes toward electric vehicles. So mapping those results, for example, inside a tool like ArcGIS Online. You can see some of the ways that narratives have been captured here. This is just in its infancy. Think of the things that we'll be able to do with AI-powered GIS here in the not-too-distant future. In fact, many of those AI tools are already here. So maps, narratives, graphics, and other ways to communicate this topic. So I encourage you to check out those two social science examples. Those are two of my favorites, but I'm going to show you another one because I'm, as you know, working with primary, secondary, university students and everybody in between and lifelong learners as well. I love this one in particular because it is created by a teacher and her 6th grade students. Yeah, you heard me right. 6th grade students making this story map about McElmo Canyon in the Four Corners region, which is a region near and dear to my heart. So they look at the strata. They look at why do people settle here, the ancestral Puebloans. They went out in the field. They sketched. They went to museums. They wrote about their experiences in the story map. They took pictures. They wrote notes. Oh my gosh, this is one of the things that, as an educator, I just love because the students are actually asking deep questions. They're observing. They're writing. They're communicating the results. So it's science. It's social science. It's language arts. It's history. It's geography. Why do people live in McElmo Canyon? Check that out. Take a look at that. Science, sketching, history, culture, and much more. So, yes, even young students can be doing this. There is usually a higher goal in teaching and research with GIS, a higher goal. So, for example, my colleague and I created this Lakota language story map, James Ratlingleaf and I. How can story maps be used to teach about and preserve indigenous languages? That was the higher, more noble goal, drawing attention to endangered indigenous languages, when many of those languages, the average age is 59, 60, or even higher in some cases. But what the short-term goal was to get students using story maps to tell the story about and learn about different landforms and how they are pronounced in Lakota and in English. So it was a simple matter of, since story maps are so powerful, pointing to that narrative that James, my colleague, narrated. And the story map says, oh, okay, that's an audio file. I'm going to configure a play button. In other words, I didn't have to code that when I was creating the story map with James. That is something that's embedded inside the story maps tools, since they're all JavaScript 4.x. They have intelligence behind them. So the short-term goal is to get students to understand the English and Lakota word for these different landforms and also these human imprints on the landscape, roads, airports, schools, etc. Okay? But the higher, more noble goal was to draw attention to endangered indigenous languages. So the idea here was, hey, if we can have short phrases and words as narrative, as audio clips inside a story map, the sky's the limit, right, folks? We could have whole narratives from tribal elders talk about why this place is important and why this town is here and why this reservoir is here, etc. Okay? So that was the higher, more noble goal. Get people thinking creatively about the tools, most certainly, but also, even more importantly, what can we do to encourage, and this is one way of many, the study of and the preservation of and the enlivening of endangered indigenous languages.